I did a video within the last year. Actually, it was longer than that, but I uploaded it more recently. It's called The Path to Knowledge and Truth. And I kind of laid out a framework that I'd learned is very real, very necessary in order for human beings to learn, to grow, to consume knowledge that leads to growth, that leads to the human, if they're ever going to find it, finding the truth. And in that video, I specifically illustrated a level system, if you will, that seems quite clear once you've gone through several levels of it. There are levels that beget new levels, and you can't get to the level 5 if you haven't gone to 4, 3, 2, and 1, because one gives rise to the other. The other does not exist without you having first gone through the first one. Because at each and every level, there is information to take in whatever form that takes for everybody that goes down this journey of individually self-educating yourself. That at level 1, you've got to learn everything that there is to learn, absorb it into your being, and understand it enough, and like a work of magic, the metaphor, the analogy that I'm explaining, level 2 opens up for you. Then there's a whole new group of subject matters, topics, things that you will learn about that you did not learn more about than you did, that give rise to better understandings and better comprehensions. Think about what I'm saying. And then, as time goes on, you take that information into your being, you absorb it, you comprehend more, you see more, you understand more of the pieces at each of the levels that you were at before, and how those pieces directly connect to the level that you're at now. And then somewhere along the line you begin to realize that everything that you know at this level is based on the fact that you took everything in at every level below the one that you're currently at. Whether you're at level 5, 10, 15, 20, just grabbing numbers, using it as an illustrative example of levels. And it's not an ego game, it's not a whose dick is bigger thing. It's just a human process that you go through. And what's contained in each level for each of us is going to be different. How rigid our belief systems are is going to be different. Because at each level, you're going to take in enough information that somewhere along the line, your paradigm is going to begin to fracture. What you thought you knew before is going to change, because you now have taken in information, you've educated yourself in a way that has caused that perspective to now change. Well, if that happens when you go, as an example, when you go from level 1 to level 2, you get some experience of that somewhere. It's going to probably happen at level 2 to level 3, level 3 to level 4. Your perception is going to change at every step along the way. It's the way it is for all of us, because more information gives rise to better understandings that give rise to more comprehension, more clarity, more ability to comprehend all of the things that we see and interpret them with more clarity, with more of an educated eye towards what it is you're seeing. It lends itself to, for instance, as one example, symbolism. The people who run the world use symbolism. They have for a very long time. The symbolism is all around us, but unless or until you study that and you obtain a level of knowledge that then gives you the ability to begin to see, then you look at corporate logos and you're like, whoa, shit, there's a symbol of this, that, or the other. And when you begin to study the occult, which these people are mired in, you begin to see how the symbol ties into something into the occult. Oh, it's just crazy. So the more you take in, the more you have the ability to see things. Using symbolism as one example of how that would manifest. One illustration of, you start diving into the occult, you're going to start seeing the symbols. You start diving into symbolism, it's going to take you into the occult. You start absorbing that body of information and start looking at the world around you, looking at television, looking, and you start seeing the symbols, that which you did not see before when you were not educated in these things. Well, think of all the subject matters that one needs to know to have half a chance of having even half of an accurate perception of the world they live in, what's going on in it, and lots of other things. So one of the points that I think I'm trying to make here is that trying to wake up other people is so largely a futile effort in vain, while your intentions may be good and your heart may be in the right place. Until you accept, align with, figure out for yourself that there is truly a path to knowledge and learning that gives one the ability to step into wisdom, that gives them the eyes to see, however that works. Those that have the eyes to see know there is a process of learning over time that you went through that has given you now the ability to see with whatever degree of clarity you can. So when you're at the level that you are, seeing what it is that you see, anybody that's at a level that is not where you are is most likely not going to fully understand, if at all, quite literally might argue against what it is that you are trying to tell them, because they just don't have the frame of reference. And when you think about the human walk of life, and let's say you're standing somewhere up on that ladder and you look down, Think of how many people are at the bottom rung, have not even taken that first step to begin to self-educate themselves. You know what I mean? To separate themselves from the proverbial herd. To self-educate. That one being a key and critical fucking thing right there. For those that have, and you look down, not down your fucking nose, it's just looking down that ladder, that rung of steps, and realize how many people are at the bottom of those steps that don't know their steps there, that'll never take the first step. And if there are people down there that you love and care about, that you're close to, there's going to come a point where the things that you say to them and the utterances that come out of your mouth might more closely resemble Charlie Brown's teacher, wah, 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 than English. It's just the way it goes. And unless you can find a way to get them up those steps, put some breadcrumbs there to get them to come up the steps, there's a degree of separating yourself from the herd that you're going to see happening. And it's this weird thing that knowledge in this world is a double-edged sword. Because it changes you, it changes your perspective, it changes your perceptions, it changes everything. And some of the processes that you go through as a human being, while your perceptions are being reformed, your paradigms being shattered, and you're going through a process of evolution that learning does for the human being, transcending the ignorance that gives rise to many of the beliefs that many of the people that are down at the bottom of the rung there haven't started yet, are mired in. So many of the beliefs that the people that haven't started this process of learning, self-education, and in the context I'm referring to it, it's the type of learning that would give them the ability to understand, for instance, what the fuck is going on right now. And unfortunately, because of men and women's egos, when they want to be, need to be, or currently are convinced that what it is that they perceive going on is actually real, and haven't yet figured out what the media is. Maybe there's some distrust. Maybe I don't believe everything that comes off the TV, but I spend most of my time acquiring most of the information that I take in from the mainstream media outlets, or the one cable outlet that kind of doesn't sound like all the rest. It's like, whoa. You got a lot of people who don't know how to find information on the web with any degree of certainty or confidence. And when you're dealing with a group of people that are currently at a lower level of the learning process of all this shit that's going on, that are, that is ignorance. Ignorance is lack of knowledge. Lack of knowledge or understanding of a particular thing, many things, everything, whatever it is. I totally spun out on that. Anyway, something else I noticed is that when people who are down there at the lower rungs that are currently dealing with ignorance don't believe you, and then begin this ego battle of questioning everything that you're telling them, and they want you to spoon feed them every little detail so that they can understand, or so that they can, and when you can't, then their level of cynicism kicks in. And what I've noticed is this funny dynamic where when you're dealing with somebody who's ignorant, profoundly or somewhat or whatever, and cynical almost to a point of frustration for anybody that tries to talk to them about anything, when you combine high levels of ignorance and high levels of cynicism together in the same human being, you got someone who's unteachable. At that point, you've got someone who's unteachable. And when you're dealing with someone who's unteachable, you just got to stop at that point, because they're not interested in learning, or they're not interested in learning from you, because some mechanism they have in their head, their mind, their perception of you, or where they should learn these types of things from. Maybe it's from their authority, from the authorities on TV, from some person that has PhD after his name, because I can only believe it if it comes from somebody who has a PhD and gives me a reason to believe that they could even possibly possess the level of knowledge that you seem to claim like, or act like, or talk like you have. See, this little fucking ridiculous dance that goes on. And when ignorance doesn't recognize wisdom, when ignorance is as cynical as it can be, and you combine the cynicism with the ignorance and an unwillingness to listen, to learn, to hear, you're dealing with somebody that's unteachable. Period, paragraph, end of fucking story. Tell me where I'm wrong in that philosophy. Comment section's open. Hit it. Where am I wrong in that philosophy? And I guess I'm realizing that there are a lot of people that are unteachable. The masses, the herd, a lot of people are unteachable in their current state. And as much as I hate to admit it, as much as I hate to point to it as one of the best teachers humankind is going to have, pain. What's going to make these people teachable? No matter who they are, friend, family, loved one, neighbor, relative, guy at the office, the douchebag across the street, whoever. When you're unteachable, no matter who you are, unfortunately, the one thing that's going to break you out of that, the one surefire thing that will break anybody out of it that's capable of being broken out of an unteachable state, is fucking pain. Copious amounts of pain and suffering. That begins to soften up the old belief systems. That begins to soften up the mind a little bit, crack it open, make it more receptive to listening, to learning, or to being willing to seek the fucking information and answers for oneself. And then along with that ego mechanism that has us convinced that everything we know is true. You can say the same thing about me. It's just I'm pointing out part of the human condition and what I've experienced. So along with this thing is the ego mechanism, then the barrier of beliefs, and then the ego that protects those beliefs. The beliefs tie into systems of beliefs which make up our paradigm. You start talking about having humans having their paradigm fractured, shattered, broken, or their beliefs challenged, not by ego or arrogance, by information that's banging on the fucking door of their beliefs because the information's right there saying, wow, what I've believed always wasn't right. There's a lot of people who are mired in pride. And because their pride also is girded with their ego, or their ego is girded with their pride, recognizing that so much of what they've believed, they've been deceived about, recognizing that somebody that's younger than them, or maybe their child, or some other person that they consider to be lesser, is bringing them to the barrier of their beliefs by simply trying to convey information to them that, well, they clearly don't know, and are simply doing it from a perspective of, this is shit you need to know, because if we don't all know this, we're all going to be fucked. So at a time when humans need to know information, where if they don't know it, we're all going to be fucked, those of us that do know, that would lovingly, arrogantly, however, we're all going to be butting up against the barrier of people's beliefs. We're going to be butting up against their ego, their pride, or whatever else it is that becomes the barrier, which brings me to the conclusion of this. Being. It's almost illustrative of the fact that no human being is going to be able to negate the process by which the human must go through to learn. You've got to take in knowledge and information, absorb it, comprehend it, and it will give birth and rise to level 2. You have to take in everything at level 2, absorb it, learn it, become part of you so that you can give rise to level 3. Because everything that's at every other level would not be understood, could not be understood, if everything at the previous levels weren't first ingested, comprehended. So it's like this fail-safe mechanism. So those of us that want to wake up the world truly are really going against, I think, some sort of a law of nature, a process that maybe our Creator put in front of us, or whatever, where there's a very specific process of learning, taking in knowledge that leads, learning by way of taking in information that leads to knowledge, that leads to understanding, that ultimately will direct us towards the truth in as much as we will ever find it for any of us that ever will, or even get close. There seems to be, in as much as I have figured out, learned, assessed, concluded, a very specific process. Now the recipe for everybody's different in that what I need to learn versus what you need to learn and everybody else needs to learn at their stage 1 that gives rise to their stage 2. It's different for all of us. But for anybody that's learned, anybody that's attained any level of wisdom, the wisdom of the years, however you've acquired that state of learnedness, that state of wisdom, that state of having the ability to see from a perspective that many, many others don't, not from a place of arrogance or ego, from a place of just that's where the fuck you are. And you shouldn't have to explain yourself about being where you are and sharing some perspectives to other people who are not where you are. But unfortunately you do, because people are butthurt Bettys, and when you explain things to them and they see you as a lesser person, yet what you're explaining to them is lessons that they haven't learned yet, oh boy, all of a sudden there's some fucking role reversal there, some gymnastics, some problems, some ego comes in, the pride comes in, the denial comes in, the pushback comes in, the mental frustration, it's just like, whoa, you know? So it's like, when you try to wake up people who are not awake, and when you try to educate people who are not currently educating themselves, I guess, as I've said it before, when you try to hand somebody a bucket full of answers to questions that they're not yet asking themselves, it's never going to go well for you despite your best intentions, or it will rarely go well for you. If and when you've got somebody that you're dealing with that's asking you and seeking, curious, wants to know what you know and understand why you see it that way, know it that way, believe it that way, and is asking questions, it's one thing. When you can tell somebody's asking questions to try to create a doubt in your perception or perspective, thereby creating an argument or going back and forth with you, trying to do mental gymnastics because, well, they see you're kind of going over their head. So, hey, let's do some gymnastics here, and I want to pull you down here. And it's like, you know, I don't have time for this. You need to take what's being handed to you and recognize what it is, chew on it, consume it, and then wait for it to fucking help to permeate the barrier of your current belief systems. But hey, if you say that to the wrong person, you're being arrogant. You're full of yourself. Or some other fucking thing their ego perceives you as that's negative, that gives them a reason to not like you, think you're a douchebag, call you an asshole, whatever fuck is. Wait a minute. So something knows that how do I say this? It almost feels like it's easy to perceive that there's something there that knows I'm going to fuck up the whole world. And anybody that breaks away from that and is able to figure out any of this for themselves, well, they're never going to be able to do anything to counter what I've done to fuck up the world, because there's all these things in the human mind, the human psyche, the human ego, pride, and all these other things that will become, and the barriers of belief systems and indoctrinations and all that other stuff. So anyone that sees will truly have a landmine of sorts to try to get through, to simply get through to those that they love, care about, or whatever, you get the point, to get them to see. Brings me back. So there's a process. No matter how much you love and care about somebody, you can't negate that process for them. Does that make sense? Like a natural law thing. And if you try to wake up those who are not waking up, if you try to fucking hand somebody a bucket full of answers to people who aren't asking the questions, it's just going to be an effort in vain. And you're going to find yourself more frustrated with your efforts than feeling like you made a meaningful contribution despite your best efforts to do actually only and exactly that. And what's given rise to this train of thought is realizing that even now, several months after COVID, Corona, several months after all of the information that has come out, there's still such a large group of people who are wholly unaware of what the truth of this shit is. People that function from my level or my perspective kind of hope, or I've been wrongly assuming that even people who are lesser aware would begin to start seeing the writing on the wall, but they don't. They don't. A perfect illustration of that is how many people are still wearing masks. It's unreal, but it's very real, and it points directly to the fact that those people who are still wearing masks are not thinking for themselves, are not thinking critically, are not thinking independently. They're not taking in information from any other source than the mainstream. The mainstream they're so certain the mainstream's telling them the truth that they've literally behaved and modified their behavior by wearing masks everywhere they go. The masks reveal those who are unthinking. They don't think for themselves. They don't critically think. They're in a state that's more like a herd animal in their consciousness, and these people reveal themselves for who they are. It is what it is. So breaking through the barrier of people's beliefs, that's been put there probably on purpose. Trying to educate somebody that is several steps below you, wherever you are, wherever they are, whatever that equation looks like for somebody you're trying to wake up, trying to explain things to them that are not at the level that they're at or above the level that they're at is just an effort in vain. And unless or until somebody that's at a lower level than you is asking you questions and they're receptive and realize that they're learning from somebody that knows more, it's more likely going to be an effort in vain, effort in frustration, give rise to potential tensions and arguments that were certainly never part of the equation that anybody, most of the people that are trying to educate those that don't know, ever anticipated getting. When you sit there and spend all that time learning all this shit and then realize that you're somebody that sees some shit that a lot of people don't, and then from a good place in your heart go and try and fucking share that shit with people, and you're met with resistance, ridicule, criticisms, arguments, doubts, cynicism that's kind of offensive, not because cynicism's offensive, not because you don't want people to critically think and question shit, but everybody that listens to me probably knows what I mean when I say there are levels of cynicism that become offensive, especially when you're talking to somebody that you know just doesn't know. For whatever reason, they've been busy with life, or they've just been a lazy fuck and they've never learned anything, or whatever portion of it, or whatever variable in between works for them and puts them in that state. But when you're dealing with somebody that you know doesn't know, and their level of fucking cynicism is such that it literally creates arguments or requires you in their cynicism to ask and in full detail and answer every little fucking question that they can come up with on the fly, not realizing that for you to understand what it is that you fucking do has taken you years of research and learning and blah, blah, blah. They don't know that. You'll never be able to convince them of that. You'll never be able to convince somebody of this type of shit on the fly. So I'm really becoming more aware of the fact that it may do more harm than good for us to try to wake others up. Unless they're like the social media. There it's people who gravitate towards the content that you're putting out because they're hearing something that resonates with them, or what you're saying resonates with them. That makes sense. They realize you know a lot of shit about something they want to learn. People who choose or gravitate towards you, those are people who will learn from you if there's anything to be learned by what you do or by what you know. I think people out there that have a lot of knowledge and a lot of wisdom relevant to how the world works, the Jews, any of this other stuff, stand much more of a chance of teaching people who don't know about this stuff by putting what it is they know on the web, knowing that those who are seeking for this information are currently in an awakening state, hungry for information and knowledge, will be, I don't want to say receptive, but yeah, that works, because if you're not If you're conveying information to somebody who's not receptive to the information that you're conveying them, number one, they're not going to be listening, they're not going to be very receptive, and there's going to be arguments that are popping forth out of their mind or their mouth every step along the fucking way. And when you can't complete a couple of sentences that you need to complete to illustrate a point for somebody because they're firing off these cynical fucking questions and interrupting you, so it's just like you can tell there's resistance there, and at that point you're dealing with the unteachable. You're dealing with somebody who is wholly unteachable, if by nothing more than by you. For, well, you're 20 years younger than them, 30 years younger than them, because you're the brother, you're the average guy. You got an eye that turns to the left, and well, why would I listen to guys who have their eyes who turn to the left? All kinds of dumb fucking stupid reasons why people won't listen to other people, judge them, and quickly do mental gymnastics to classify these people in their minds as somebody that they ought not or should not listen to because, well, he's got an eye that points to the left. What could he know that I don't? I'm coming up with ridiculous things, trying to insert something in there. You get what I'm saying, I hope. And if you don't, sorry, you're going to have to learn to keep up. It was like how I learned how to ride a motorcycle. I got on a motorcycle that I didn't know how to ride very well, a dirt bike, and I followed a bunch of older dudes that were real good. And I stayed on their tail for a while. And they constantly lost me, and I constantly ended up riding back by myself. But at one point, it got to the point where I could keep up and and ride through with them the whole ride, even though I was behind them. And then it got to a point where I kept up with the pack. Then it got to the point where I was one of the guys that were in the pack. And then it got to the point where I could outride most of the guys that I learned to ride from. And why did I get good at riding a motorcycle? Because I followed guys that I knew were better than me, that left me in the dust for a long time. But there came a point where by continuously following them, so to speak, it's just an illustration. It happened to me. That's the way I learned how to ride a motorcycle. But with all things, even learning, you follow people online that you think know more than you. So it illustrates the point that we're probably never going to get through to anybody that's not asking the questions. It's just not the way it was intended to be. Or I don't think that there would be so many barriers for those of us that see to get through to those that do not. You know what I mean? If I could somehow take what I've learned in the last 15 years and give it to somebody that's at level 1, their mind would probably explode. Think about it. As one example, anybody else, you're on level 20. There's somebody in your family that you know doesn't know. You don't want them to go through a lot of pain through all this process, so you want to bring them up to speed. You can't. You can't even put your hand out and help to pull them up layer by layer by layer. You can't. Because there's a lot of accepting a lot of shit along the way that the human has to go through. And until you get to a point of acceptance of some of the shit that you will learn, some of the shit that you will stumble across, the hideous shit too, until you get to a point of acceptance, because the next level of learning won't open up for you. You see what I'm saying? So there's very specific processes, I believe, that the human has to go through to expand themselves, to grow themselves, to learn, to obtain any degree of wisdom and clarity in this life that has any real substance. End of my train of thought. Take it easy, people.